Okay, thank you very much. It is after lunch. I'm quite aware of how we're all feeling because I'm feeling a little that way myself. I'm just going to get your involvement. I just need a show of hands for those of you who are familiar with, have heard of, or done any deep ripping in the past. Keep your hand in the air if you've actually been using deep ripping over the last 5 years. Anyone ripping longer than 10 years here? One bloke. Excellent. Excellent. Good to know. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the work that we've done over the last 4 seasons. The work was implemented in 2015. It's a number of deep ripping trials over 7 different soil types. And today I'm going to be talking about, yep, we're good. Thanks, Mindy. Today I'm going to be talking about 2 of them, and they're at the more extreme end of the soil types that we see. But before I get there, the things I want you to know or take home from today is we've really got to know our enemy. And what I'm talking about by enemy there, I'm talking about constraint. Deep ripping doesn't fix all your soil constraints. It certainly has a big impact on soil compaction. But if you don't know where that soil compaction is in your soil, you might either be ripping too shallow or spending too much and ripping too deep. It's important that we know our enemy. The next one, plates provides positive, particularly when I'm talking return on investment. I'm going to explain that a little more. I've used the alliteration just to get it to stick to our minds, but topsoil slotting plates do provide a benefit when we're deep ripping. However, provided we know what we're deep ripping and why we're deep ripping to start with, we'll sort of determine as to whether we use the plates or not, and it has a big impact on the potential returns for those plates. Okay, so as I said, this work was implemented 5 years in 2015 with this, now excuse my terminology, but often referred to as a bastardised ripper, because what it is actually a trial ripper, and it is designed specifically for trials. You won't see, and I hope you don't see anything quite like this in the future. Grizzly deep delver tines, aggro plough tines, front tines are shallow leading tine. These are rear trailing tines, directly in line with the front tine. And these are working at somewhere between 200 to 300 mils. The rear tine has a capacity to get to 600. And on top of those rear tine, on the back of those rear tines are the topsoil slotting plates that I've been talking about or mentioned earlier. They can look like that, or they can look like that. It doesn't really matter. Their intention is to open up the soil behind the tine, and they are working so that the soil surface is above those tines. It's about here. They're working below the surface to encourage that topsoil down into the subsoil. Why are we doing that? We're doing that because that topsoil generally has a higher organic matter content. Not that it's particularly high. We're talking anything from 0.7 to 1 if in the better circumstances. But we are also including that lime that's sitting on the surface and trying to get that into the subsurface where we've got a nasty pH barrier in a lot of these sandy soils that you see here. Talked about going to extremes. I'm going to start at Moora. This is the sort of soil type we're talking about. It is a deep, loamy yellow sand. Clay contents in the order of 4 to 6% as we go down the profile. Pretty low, but very productive, high potential for these soils to be quite productive. What you're looking at there is that darkened organic stained layer that the inclusion plate has dropped down to depth, and the number of the root hairs that are really quite packed in there. As I mentioned, there is a pH barrier. Low pH in subsoil, which is between 20 and 35 centimetres or thereabouts. And The biggest constraint by far at that site is compaction. We're talking soil strengths in excess of 2.5 megapascals at 300 down to about 450. So when we break that soil out, what does it look like 4 years later? So we've run that ripper through, and this is a soil strength measurement from that soil 4 years after it was ripped. Soil strength along the top and our depth down the side. The nil rip, I need to mention, all of these trials were then managed under a CTF system. So these haven't been driven on for 4 years. And we'd expect that after 4 years, this soil strength is going to sort of increase because these are our rip lines. The orange one has the plates on, the yellow one is ripped to 550 without plates. However, we haven't seen a marked shift back toward the nil or the nil ripped. Those soils in those slots is still very loose where that time's run through. What does that mean for our root numbers in that soil? And this is a simplified version of a lot of numbers to measure root numbers in this trial. We did a pit, we cleaned the face off, put up against the face, it's 50 by 50 well mesh, and then every little hole on that mesh, we give it a figure from 0 to 4. 0, no roots, 4, more than 50 in that, or 30, I think, in that box. And then we go down the profile with it. And we get it back, it looks like that. Green at the top, high root numbers, red where there are lower root numbers. Wrong button. Our topsoil slotting certainly improved the root numbers as we went to depth. However, these numbers here are quite similar, and while we're seeing a red number, I haven't put the numbers and the LSDs on there because let's not make it any more confusing than it already is. We're certainly seeing a greater number of roots to depth when we're ripping that deep and with those plates on in this particular soil type. What have we seen in terms of yield? What we're looking at here is a yield as a percent related to the nil. So over and above the nil, what have we seen? In our first year, we had quite a marked response to our ripping without plates, and this is ripping to 550 mils on that sand. We're in a canola. The nil yield was 1.8 tonnes to the hectare, and our nearly 50% increase in yield at that site was certainly significant. Didn't see a significance even though we have such a large response from the plates there as well. Year 2, again, very significant. This was quite obvious in the crop when we went back to see it, and we're wondering why we aren't seeing that significant response from our topsoil slotting plates. And the jury's still out as to why, you know, that extra organic matter and nutrition and that sort of stuff that we buried hasn't given us a significant yield consistently, or as much as we'd expect as we see from just 550 alone. Now I'm going to the other end of the state, and I'm down at Ongerup. This is a sandy clay duplex. It's very gritty, it's a grey clay, and its major limiting factor is that below 300 mils, we've got a very sodic, very dispersive subsoil. These soils, generally, we don't expect to see a response from deep ripping. So this was more a case of, well, let's test out that topsoil slotting plate, get that organic matter into the subsoil, and let's see if we can hold that soil open a little bit longer, try and reduce some of that sodicity. What you're looking at there are surface clods, rather large surface clods that were brought up from the subsoil by the topsoil slotting plates themselves. We were only able to rip to 400 mils at this site. It was rock hard. It looked something like that. So you've got a very distinct topsoil, which is slightly more sand in, over very hard subsoil And that is the pit wall where I was trying to assess roots from. We couldn't get in very deep. It was a bastard. Soil strength measurements all over the place, and really hard to take anything solid from that. Yep, there's a bit of a trend to having lower soil strength, and these, by the way, are relative numbers. Let's not take them as gospel, purely because I did this when I was there, and the soil profile wasn't fully wet. So they're relative numbers. So yeah, we think we might see some slightly lower soil strength under the rip with topsoil sliding plates. What are we up to? Yep, thank you. And but given the variability, it's quite tricky to determine that. This is what our roots looked like. Again, sort of, there was, when we analysed the numbers, those pretty patterns, basically, they're pretty colour, but there's no significance in them. So it might look like we're getting more roots from topsoil sliding, but that might be in the way that I sampled it, basically, because that's a very tricky soil to analyse. And if you peel off the face, what you find is that you might peel off large clods, and there's a whole lot of roots that have followed down between those clods that actually aren't getting into them, so they're not having that much more influence on the benefit of the crop anyway. Okay, so let's have a look at this, and this tells us a different story as to the one I've just been leading up to, making you think that it's looking pretty poor, but the response from the ripping at that site has been pretty good. We've certainly seen shallow ripping at 300, providing a response in each of the first 2 years. But I need to context these results because 2015, 16 and 17, every year at that site there was water inundation and waterlogging. So 2018 was the worst year for rainfall and that they'd had for a while. And what we saw was a rainfall pattern that was fairly low rainfall events over the course of the season and not large rainfall events. We didn't actually see any waterlogging or inundation of that site in 2018. So what we've seen there is perhaps a response that we're more likely to see after ripping, where we don't have that impact of waterlogging and needing to move water through the soil. I think we need to unpack this trial a little better because of that response. And we have seen in other trials, we do see responses to deep ripping, which aren't actually because of increased root growth, but more for water flow and getting it out of the paddock. This is a particularly tricky paddock. It's a Sunday soil. It's too wet on Saturday and too dry on Monday, and if you don't get it on Sunday, then you don't get it in. Okay, that's a pretty basic, very quick run through of a lot of the data that we've had. I've only shown you 2 sites from those 7 sites that I've had. I'm happy to discuss over question times a little bit more about the topsoil sliding plate, the logistics, the draft force requirements, that sort of thing. But before we start talking topsoil sliding plates, we need to understand why we're deep ripping in the first place. Know our enemy. Oh, I have to skip this a little bit. But anyway, I will skip this bit and wind up. But we need to know our enemy, understand the constraint that we're trying to remove or combat with our deep ripping. And yep, the plates certainly do provide some positives, particularly when we're talking in that bust up of the soil and perhaps getting that extra water movement. That's where I'll leave it. Thank you very much.